The Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference is coming to Dallas, Texas, February 16, 17, and 18 in 2018. If you know of a better way to get the latest insider knowledge about crypto, to hear directly from the top minds in this field, to interact personally with 800 fellow crypto lovers, hodlers, investors, miners, traders, developers, and founders, then I'd like to hear about it. If you don't, then you don't want to miss out. Register today for the Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference. Go to bitcoinsuperconference.com and register today as a super early bird to get the lowest rates on tickets and hotel rooms. That's bitcoinsuperconference.com.
Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost Here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with Future Tech Podcast. I have a guest from Singularity University, one of the faculty members named Barry O'Reilly. Barry, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, and just for listeners, we've interviewed probably 20 different members of Singularity University. Each of them is extremely unique, very interesting, involved in all kinds of great stuff.
It's an interesting group of people at Singularity, and definitely one of the reasons, not only do I enjoy working there, but it's definitely one of the reasons that brought me to that community. So happy to share my lessons learned and the mistakes I've made along the way with everybody. So hopefully they can make better mistakes and do better things.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about your background and how you came to Singularity, and then let's talk about what you're doing there.
Yeah, so my background is pretty varied. My first job ever was working, when I was in university, I came over to San Francisco. I grew up in Ireland. My first job was working in a company called citysearch.com. I don't know if you're familiar with that company.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, well, CitySearch were putting companies on the internet back in the sort of late 90s. And it was really interesting. We were sort of building websites to put people, businesses on the internet so they could sell their products and services and just be on the internet. And that sort of first got me excited about technology and its impact on society and also business model and product development. And then from there, I sort of started to experiment with different types of businesses. I was part of a mobile games development company. Just after Nokia had Snake on the phone, and the new versions of phones had really small microprocessors on them, and you could run games from the sort of 50s and 60s on phones. So we started building mobile games for these telecommunications companies, and it's pretty fun with the technology. Again, still fairly raw, but we built this Tamagotchi-like game, which was the most popular game in the UK network, and our company sort of got a lot of exposure. So businesses like Sega and Disney were ringing us to build these products, and we were like 4 people in a room in northern Scotland trying to figure out how to do this stuff. So I've been really lucky to have lots of interesting experiences with technology breakthroughs and the impact that technology has had on products and services and society. And really, I've just built it up from there. Currently, I work for myself now, working and coaching a lot of senior executives from Fortune 500 companies about how to adopt technology and leverage it for their businesses, as well as growing their people and teams. And that's really what brought me to Singularity. I was inspired by the mission to educate, inspire, and empower leaders with exponential technologies, but also address humanity's grand challenge. And the social impact part of this has always been a huge part for me, which I really enjoy. And could enjoy working with Singularity, both on their accelerator programs, executive programs, and symposiums all around the world.
So what are some of the grand challenges you're seeing that businesses have when they're looking at or considering new technology? I mean, where is the breakdown of the problem that you need to help work on?
Well, the big challenge for most organizations is they're often have a sunk cost fallacy with the technology or the business models that they currently have today. They're so invested in making things work because they've made investments in making them work that it's very difficult for them to sort of break out of their mental paradigm about what the impact of new technologies could have in the way that they serve their customers, they solve their business model problems and reach a broader audience. And for most leaders in organizations, the first time when you talk about a new technology, the initial reaction is inertia, or they'll believe it when they see it. And then as we start to see these technology breakthroughs start to happen, what we actually really understand is that they need to believe that these things can happen before they can actually see them happening. And there's lots of topical things like that happening at the moment. I think cryptocurrencies is probably one of the things that are really starting to gain more traction and visibility for businesses. And they're starting to understand the underlying capability of a blockchain technology and how that starts to help them understand that they can have more efficiencies in their business, that they can have a higher fidelity of information, a trust and sharing of information, which will ultimately lead to faster business decisions for them and cheaper operating costs. But it's still, all these technologies feel far away, but really, because it's exponential growth, they're much closer than they think. And that's sort of some of the interesting problems you try to help them understand.
What technologies? What specific use cases? I mean, can you give me some specifics?
Well, that if we sort of build towards, if you think back, one of the first exponential technologies I think I was working on in the early 2000s was cloud adoption. Previously organizations had to spend millions of dollars on infrastructure that was to host their websites, their services, that often was very rarely used. The utility of that investment was very low. And then we had these new introduction of cloud technology, which essentially allowed organizations to hire technology to do a job for them only when they needed it. And they didn't have to pay millions of dollars up front. They paid based on usage. So all these sort of overinflated investments that weren't leveraged started to go away. You could suddenly pay by the second, by the amount of capacity you needed, and then on demand for services that started to become a utility in themselves. So I was building a new service for the largest TV station in the UK. And they had this problem where they had a very famous chef. His name's Jamie Oliver. You might be familiar with him. And every time at the end of his show, at the end of his show every week, what he used to do was say, if you want to go and get the recipe for the show today, go to the website now. And their website would go from somewhere in the region of a couple of thousand people to a couple of million people hitting that site at the same time, just after the show ended. And this would cause invariably their website to go down. If they wanted to fix it, it would cost them millions of dollars. But what we were able to do was use and build new products and services with them and leverage technology like cloud infrastructure that would let them scale their infrastructure on demand. So when they knew that Jamie was going to say at the end of the show, go get my recipe, expand out their capacity on demand for that short period of time and serve all their customers and give them great experiences, let them download the site. And then when 10 minutes later, after everyone had downloaded the recipe, they could scale it back down. Right, so it optimized the way that they did business, delivering great outcomes for their customers, made it more efficient because they were only spending the money they needed to at the time. But it changed the way that they started to see that technology was a capability of their business rather than a cost center. And these are big breakthroughs for companies. Similarly now, I coach a lot of the leadership teams from one of the top biggest banks in America. And how banks have started to adopt this idea of cloud infrastructure to change the way that they deliver to customers, run cheaper, faster, higher quality services is really starting to impact not only the revenue that they're saving, but the speed and quality that they're delivering new products and services. So this is stuff that was happening in the 2000s. Following that, I started to get into the Internet of Things. I'm a big advocate of when these new technologies come out, it's important that you experiment with them and understand their capabilities. And for most businesses, they're afraid to experiment. They're afraid to trial and learn and make mistakes and use the information they've learned from their experiments to improve the products and services that they want. And so the interesting thing necessarily is not so much the technology, but it's the way that it helps you solve a customer problem in a very different way. And so you hear too much of the buzzword about what the technology is and not enough of the capability it delivers. And Internet of Things is quite an interesting one. I was working with a company in Germany. They're the fourth largest coffee producer in the world. And they wanted to build an Internet of Things coffee machine. And for most people, that sort of sounds a little bit redundant. And why would I make a coffee based on my phone? But there's interesting nuances start to happen when you have connectivity to devices. because these devices start to become your eyes, your ears. They start to constantly learn about what and usage patterns of where people use your products, what times they use the products at, what locations are more likely to buy a certain type of coffee bean and use it in their machine. So they can start to optimize all sorts of their business, like everything from how the shelves are stocked in the local grocers right through to the type of beans and offers that they make to their customers. So they're constantly building better services and products for them. So these things become systems that are, they're systems that are connected to one another, that learn from one another. And this is where the exponential aspect of Singularity's work and my own becomes quite interesting. Because for most people, they have a very linear mindset about how progress happens. For often people can only sort of see the next obvious step for them or what they believe to happen right in front of them. And for most people, they're often very resistant to change. They're afraid of change. It feels new. It's different. And they struggle to adopt it. But the world we're in, especially when we're using technology as a capability, is exponential, because learning is compounded. And the volume of learning and information that we get from running experiments and testing these products and services compounds and accelerates and speeds up. And with the advent of more technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning, it means that we can process more volumes of information and look for different patterns that are not obvious to the human eye, so to speak. And it becomes really, really interesting. And I think, as I said, the topical one at the moment now is the impact of blockchain technology, specifically around cryptocurrencies, and how people might start to interact and use money in the future is really quite interesting. And especially because money is such a close topic to people.
And no, these are good examples. Before we move on to money, when you're talking about IoT devices, it would be great. Let's say a coffee seller gets all this information, but what about the customers? Do they fear surveillance? Do you think that there'll be countervailing forces that will block the adoption of things like this because of, again, people's fears?
I think, people, if you use people's information voluntary and in a way that helps make their life more simpler, more effective, and that they see benefits from, I think we're conditioned to be okay with that. And if you think about the social media companies, they have the largest unpaid workforce in the world. People go onto these sites and they experience these services that they provide them, but they don't pay for them. They pay for them by giving up information about themselves is monetized to advertising companies, and that's what they pay for with that information that they're willing to share. But I think what you find with products and services and loyalty with customers, when things are built really well, that if you create great experiences for them, if you offer them personalized and relevant content to them that is helpful, they value that. And even more, if you open up the system that they can contribute to it and that their contribution can be recognized and rewarded, maybe in terms of discounts or opportunities to become advocates for their products, that actually builds even stronger loyalty. And I think we're going to see some really interesting ways about how that interaction between customers and products and services and the companies that provide them starts to evolve as technology becomes a more of an enabler of giving people a platform to be successful. And just to give a very low-level example, the advent of social media has given rise and voices to many people who might blog and have now become, brand representation or representatives for all sorts of companies, be it fashion, be it products and services that primarily used to only be available to famous people. But now these products and services, they want to reach out to influencers, people who have a social currency. And we're starting to see different types of interactions happen there. And that's very much in the media and advertising space. But I think we're going to see more of that start to move into more commercial spaces and more of a mode of operation for a lot of businesses.
Well, what's an example there? Can you give me how an influencer would connect with people maybe more directly and more efficiently for a given product?
Yeah, well, I think there's some really interesting initiatives happening at the moment. I think the founder of Mozilla Firefox is working on a crypto browser. And what they're trying to understand is that previously there has always been an intermediary between the content that you choose to view and how you view that content and an advertiser who's trying to reach the customer. So this might manifest itself pretty much in that I log onto a social media application like Facebook. I get to see my friends' photos, but there's a whole load of advertisements that are happening there. And essentially the advertisers pay the Facebook, and then I get free service for actually accessing Facebook, but I have to look at the content the advertisers are providing. Now, what if you could create systems or browsers where Facebook didn't exist anymore? That there was a direct connection between I could go onto the internet and view things that I want, and then advertisers would just pay directly into a source that would, if they advertised on the browser that I looked at, that I would get some remuneration for that I would be paid to view, to actually look at some of their advertisements directly. And these are some of the opportunities that technologies like blockchain can actually start to provide, that they can disintermediate these companies that have to build these products and services and allow organizations to go directly to customers. And if I want to view certain types of advertisements on my browser, I can be paid money by that advertiser directly. So there's some really interesting nuances that can start to happen here. And I think we're very much only in the infancy of this world. And it's pretty exciting to see some of these things happening.
I know that you worked with Eric Ries with the Lean Startup. Maybe I don't know if it's even a change in direction. But what about corporations? And I know blockchain looks like it's going to decentralize corporations, perhaps change the hierarchy and all that. Any comments there on how you see corporations in general changing and the cultures within them, the people within them, the nature of work, those kinds of things? What's coming there?
I think that the most exciting part about what potentially technologies like blockchain offer is that it can start to represent the trust systems that currently involve a lot of manual processing in organizations. And what I mean by that is a lot of the trust systems that we have for business decision making involves, if I have an idea, I have to go to a committee of people who will review my idea and see if it has merit or not. And if they're happy with that idea and they believe that I'm a worthy person or character, then they might sign off that we could potentially invest some money in this, but they might have to go to another board before things get signed off and reviewed. And if that board was happy, eventually a decision will be made and I'll be allowed to progress and move forward with my idea and start to hopefully do some innovation in the business. There's a lot of bureaucracy systems in place to manage trust. And that's slow and it takes time and there's people involved in it and it's expensive to get decisions made. And this is one of the challenges for most businesses. It's not that they don't have the ideas, it's that the decision-making process to allow people to innovate and move and sign off on things is so slow. Now, when you start to think about how technology could replicate that decision-making process, how technology could be used to look at my history and credibility as an individual in the organization and the types of work that I have done or the other pieces of work I had signed off or succeeded or not, or decision-making forums about whether we should sign off on something or it should be done or it should be moved, could be automated. This is the type of capability that blockchain can start to actually augment, if not displace, because all the information that you might need to understand about who somebody is, whether they're trustworthy or not, whether they should be trusted with an investment, whether they're likely to repay things, all of that information will start to be available to people in a technology system that's open, that's transparent, and can be accessed. So a lot of this human sort of bureaucracy and checks and balances starts to become automated, which becomes really powerful then when you start to think about if we want to start to make decisions at speed, that if we want to actually start to unlock innovation in organizations and let people, when they have ideas or opportunities to innovate their business, put them out there and have an automated system that could do the governance checking, it means that we can start to move faster, at higher fidelity and at greater speed. And I think these are some of the more interesting use cases for businesses, is how can they start to automate a lot of the bureaucracy in their organization and use a system of trust like the blockchain will provide that will allow them to make decisions faster, more frequently, and at any moment in time, the optimal solution for what they might need to do. And that's quite exciting for me and the kind of businesses I'm working with, especially when you start to think about financial services and the amount of governance and slowness of meetings and sign-off that's required to get contracts signed, that is required for money to be cleared as it moves us from one bank to another and between one individual and another. It really starts to become quite interesting when all of those systems can be automated and decisions can be made in milliseconds rather than months.
Any downside to this hyperconnectivity and this automated decision making?
I think the challenges with any automation is it can change very, very quickly the skills and competencies that is required of people in society. And I think we have to be very aware that some people are in a very privileged position where they have an opportunity to constantly reskill and learn and adapt their capabilities to the current world that we're operating in. For many people, it's very difficult for them to retrain, to try new skills, to develop themselves, or companies don't give them opportunities to create spaces for them to do that. So I think it's really important that we recognize that there's a responsibility on all of us to create a space where people can personally develop their skills and constantly improve the way they work. And especially when they're in organizations, there's a responsibility on those organizations to make that space for them. And I think it's one of the challenges I see that most companies rarely spend enough time investing in their people. They say they're their best asset, but aren't actually giving them the skills and capabilities they need to do that. And I think that's one of the challenges we face is this sort of increase in innovation and automation. People have to learn how to learn again, and companies need to give them the support and the opportunity to do that.
So what kind of timelines are we looking at for some of these innovations? Blockchain, for instance. When do you see it being used in various companies, in a widespread way? When do you see, some of the new technologies that are out there that are really promising, customers experiencing them or companies using them en masse? How far out are we?
Every time I try to make a prediction, it always seems to calve itself when something new happens. I'm not great in the prediction business. But what I can tell you is that I work with a lot of the senior leaders in financial services organizations, and they see the opportunity that blockchain provides to bring efficiencies to the way that they transact and send money all over the world. And most of these organizations, if not already, are building different types of transaction protocols on platforms like Etherium and starting to understand about how they can start to use this technology to collaborate not only internally in their business but with other banks. I think I'm currently part of a early stage consortium that's going to focus specifically on open banking standards. So more and more what we're seeing, especially in Europe, is that all banking data is going to become democratized. There is legislation now that has been passed that anyone can have open access to their banking records available through APIs, which means businesses are going to be able to start to build small products and services on top of these existing sort of infrastructure that the banks already provide, and they're going to have to make their data available to them. So much like organizations who develop products like Mint, where I could essentially dial into my bank account and understand my spending patterns, you're going to see lots of innovation from smaller startups that are going to be able to move faster and quicker than the banks to build these really customer-rich applications where you can start to, have a central source about all your financial management and where you spend your money and what you want to spend it on, or start to make links with insurance companies, or at any point in time, what's the most effective place for you to be saving your money and quickly be able to move it from one bank to another. What you're going to see is that people are going to get more in the situation where they can make the optimal decision at any moment in time to get the best benefit from that decision. And whether that's an interest rate hike on a savings account that's happening in one bank to another, whether it's an opportunity to save money on your insurance from one insurance company to another, people will have much more opportunity and options about how they can move their money around at speed to maximize the return for that. And I think this is, again, where we're going to see some really interesting things start to happen about how people interact. And a simple example we've already seen in the insurance area is how Lemonade has come in and essentially taken away huge proportions of the insurance business from many traditional organizations by building an insurance service that's based around artificial intelligence and making you an offer based on answering 10 to 12 questions about a premium that you should pay for your area. And this can be done in 3 minutes. And you've just changed your whole insurance company and you're up and covered straight away. That speed, that quality, it's amazing. And that's just it. That's a product that is out in the market and operating and exponentially powering ahead. So I think more and more what you're going to see is that the customer is going to have so many more options, and at any moment in time, they'll have services that allow them to avail of those options, capture the reward of that option, be it a small increase in a savings percentage, may it be a fluctuation in a currency if you want to try and trade. And I think, when you start to augment this with artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms that you can coach and train your strategies to, all of this stuff starts to become automated in ways that we've never seen before. And I think that's where it gets really exciting about the future and how technology is, again, solving the same problems we've always had. Where do I want to save my money? Where can I get the most return? But it's not asking that question once every 2 years or every 6 months. It's asking that question every second and then being able to make decisions that are so frictionless to allow you move your money to these types of locations without even you having to think about it. That starts to become really powerful about what some of these exponential technologies can do.
And it sounds like instead of trying to, break down the walled gardens of information that a lot of these companies have, where, the initiatives are essentially going around them, going direct to consumer, and just creating a new and better way to interact, like the insurance examples you gave. So then the old players will either adapt or perish.
This is the challenge they're all facing, and this is what makes, I think, our world so interesting. I always say the customer problems remain the same, but technology provides us interesting ways to solve them in a more efficient and effective manner. And just like Lemonade has quickly disrupted the insurance industry by creating a very simple service that you answer 10 questions and suddenly you're given a price and premium to cover your goods straight away, we're going to see more of this happen, not only in financial services, but other areas of life. The way that we look for houses, the way that we buy products and services online. I think the skills we've already seen from Amazon in terms of the way that they automate the offers that people are made based on the product that you purchase. Here's the recommended products you should buy next. These learning algorithms only get better and better and better over time, and they adapt more to your behavior and your tastes and your needs. And I think that's going to offer some really interesting value propositions as we go forward. And that's what gets me excited about the way technology is impacting these businesses. And I really enjoy working with the leaders of these companies as we explore these technologies, the capabilities they provide, and then ultimately unlock huge amounts of value and opportunity for the businesses in the future. I think one of the important things to note, it's not just a case of large organizations being disrupted by startups and all of them disappear. One of the advantages large organizations have is that they have a huge and rich pool of customers that they can co-create with. And customers want to build products for banks and services that they really enjoy. They like using them. And I think one of the aspects that I often find companies miss is this huge opportunity to use customers as part of their product and development process, to invite them to help them test out these new products and services, learn what works and doesn't. And the interesting thing about this is it only builds deeper loyalty with your customers. When you invite them to be part of the creation process of the new products or services that you're building, it builds much deeper relationships and loyalty to that product because they feel like they're helping to create it. So something for companies out there to consider, that it isn't just a startup. They can leverage some of the advantage they have to win.
Well, very good, Barry. For people that are interested in possibly working with you, finding out more about what you're doing, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, so I think, so you can go to my website. It's barryoreilly.com. I also am the founder of ExecCamp, Exec Camp is where I get executives to leave their business for up to 8 weeks with the goal of launching new companies to disrupt their existing companies. I've run that program for the world's largest airline companies, banking and retail organizations. This is a great chance for executives and leaders to actually learn what it's like to use these tools and techniques and experiment with what works for them and innovate at scale. So they're the simplest ways, and also available on Twitter at Barry O'Reilly.
Okay, very good. Well, Barry, thanks for coming on the call. I really appreciate it. And you're the leanest, meanest guy in the industry that I've heard from. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
The Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference is coming to Dallas, Texas, February 16, 17, and 18 in 2018. If you know of a better way to get the latest insider knowledge about crypto, to hear directly from the top minds in this field, to interact personally with 800 fellow crypto lovers, hodlers, investors, miners, traders, developers, and founders, then I'd like to hear about it. If you don't, then you don't want to miss out. Register today for the Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference. Go to bitcoinsuperconference.com and register today as a super early bird to get the lowest rates on tickets and hotel rooms. That's bitcoinsuperconference.com.
You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.